Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to the second lesson for this week. It also happens to be the last lesson for this week and the last lesson on the Cold War. This lesson is going to focus on the events of the end of the Cold War. Now, as you go through this, be sure you are taking your own notes if you want to, but I highly recommend that you use the worksheet that I've uploaded to Canvas to help keep track of the information. There will be a little quiz on this stuff, so be sure you review your notes before you take that quiz because it is not open notes, okay? So let's talk about the end of the Cold War here. We've talked about all the events. We talked about how World War II leads to the Cold War. The Cold War starts almost immediately at the end of World War II. We looked at our desire for containment to stop the spread of communism. That's going to influence our decisions in Japan. That's going to influence our decisions in Korea and Vietnam. We didn't get involved in China, and China fell to communism, which is one of the reasons we do get involved in Korea and Vietnam and also in Cuba. So, what is going to bring this contest between the US and the Soviet Union to an end? Well, the key to the victory is going to be our strong military. Okay, our military is the key to U.S. victory over the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union just can't keep up with us, and we'll explain why that is in a few minutes. Okay, now millions of Americans serve in the military during the Cold War. I mean, think about it. From the end of World War II, 1945, all the way up until 1989, 1990, the early 1990s. Okay, that's over 40 years. Okay, that's over 40 years. So millions of Americans are going to serve in the military during the Cold War, often at great personal and family sacrifice. Okay, they're separated from their family, they're separated from their friends. We talked about this a little bit with Vietnam. What they see on the battlefields is going to impact them greatly, so they serve with great sacrifice. Now, part of this dedication is explained by the quotes of one of our presidents. Okay, U.S. forces are going to defend freedom, and this dedication, I think, is best summed up by the inaugural address of President John F. Kennedy. In his inaugural address, Kennedy pledged that the United States would pay any price, bear any burden, and meet any hardship. Okay, that's what those that serve in the military are going to do. And we do that because we're upholding our belief in containment. We're upholding the Truman Doctrine. We're upholding our desire to stop the spread of communism. And not only are we going to do that for ourselves, but we're going to do that to support any friend, oppose any foe, in order to assure the survival and success of liberty. Why is our military going to work so hard? Why are so many people going to join the military? This is why we want to see their survival and success of liberty. In that same speech, Kennedy also says, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Not just those serving in the military, but if you are interested in stopping the spread of communism, what can you do to support the U.S. in the face of communist countries? Okay? It's kind of like what we talked about with World War II. If we're going to win this thing, we all have to be in it together. Okay? We want to all stop communism. We all have to be in it together. What can you do to help us assure the survival and success of liberty? Now, like I said, during the Cold War, millions of Americans are going to serve in the military, defending freedom in wars and conflicts that are not always popular. And you can see here the picture I'm using is a protest of the Vietnam War. That's probably one of the more unpopular wars, probably the most unpopular war during the Cold War. During the course of that war, okay, and during the course of other wars like Korea and even actions in Cuba, many are killed or wounded. But as a result of our service, the United States and American ideals of democracy and freedom are ultimately going to prevail in the Cold War struggle with the Soviet Union. Okay, we are ultimately going to be victorious in the end because of the sacrifice of those in the military. Now, we talked about this at the end of last week when we were talking about the end of the Vietnam War, okay, specifically with the Vietnam War. Unlike, sorry, Unlike veterans of World War II who returned to a grateful and supportive nation, Vietnam veterans often returned to face indifference and hostility for those opposed to the war. Over time, though, this indifference and hostility is going to cool. It goes back to the previous slide. We realize the sacrifice. Many are killed and wounded. We realize the sacrifice. They're torn away from their family and their friends. We realize the sacrifice. They probably don't want to be in that conflict either. And they experience all the bloodshed and things like that over in Vietnam that we have no knowledge of. And in the end, even though it was an unpopular war, our ideals of democracy and freedom are able to prevail. So over time, this indifference and hostility is going to cool. And one of the best examples of that, of the improvement, several years after the end of the war, the wounds begin to heal. And the best example of that is the construction of the Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., where we're going to record the names of all those that paid the ultimate sacrifice during the conflict that ultimately allows democracy and freedom to prevail in the face of communism. Okay? So wounds are going to begin to heal, and we begin to recognize and honor the service and sacrifices of all veterans. Even if you are serving in an unpopular conflict, your service is important and needs to be recognized. Okay? And like I said, the best example of this is the construction of the wall in DC. Now, we know we're going to win. We win because of our military might, okay, and the sacrifice of so many men and women willing to serve in the military. But there are things going on in the Soviet Union that also help us claim victory. So the last thing we're going to look at here are the Soviet Union's internal problems. All right. One of the big things is the Soviet Union just can't compete economically with the US. Okay, it just can't do it. Its economy is weaker. It doesn't have the same buying power that we do. It doesn't have the same spending power that we do. We're able to ramp up the military, and the Soviets just aren't. Okay, they cannot compete in terms of spending on the military with the US. While their economy is weakening, all these Soviet satellites that we've talked about, all these places that Stalin took over during World War II and others after him took over, those countries begin a process of nationalism. They want to be free. They do not want to be under the control of Soviet Union. Now, I'm not saying all of them want to be democratic and capitalist, okay? Some of them want to stay communist, but they don't want to be controlled by the Soviet Union. So there's kind of this internal struggle. While the Soviets are fighting the United States, okay, or competing with the United States in the Cold War, at the same time, the Soviet republics, they want to be independent, they want to be free. So there's this internal struggle going on within the Soviet Union as well. Again, the economy of the Soviet Union is weak. It can't keep up with the reforms of a market economy, right? It's going to have to open itself up to capitalism if it wants to survive in the new economic world. Okay, so there are all these economic reforms going on. And between the fact that it can't keep up with our spending and because the economic reforms are going on, that heightens and that highlights the economic inefficiency. Okay? This desire for everybody to be equal is just not working out. It's making everybody equally poor in the Soviet Union. So ultimately, the Soviet Union is economically inefficient, which makes it unable to keep up with reform and makes it unable to keep up with spending in terms of the military compared to the United States. So the Soviet Union is beginning to weaken. There's a new president, okay, by the 80s and 90s, okay, there's a new president in the Soviet Union. There's also a new president in the United States. Ronald Reagan is going to become president in 1980, and he's going to serve from 1980 until 1988. He is going to put pressure on the Soviet Union and their new president, Mikhail Gorbachev, to support democracy. And Reagan basically comes to Gorbachev and he says, look, you got to realize you just can't keep up. Spending can't keep up. We're dominating you in terms of the military. You just can't keep up. We want to help you, and that's what he says. We will help you if you want to transition to democracy. Okay, we'll stand by you. Now, luckily, not only do you have a supportive president on our side of things, but you also have a supportive president on the Russian side, on the Soviet side as well. Gorbachev is open to change. In fact, he's got a new plan. It's got two parts. Okay. Gorbachev's plan calls for glasnost, which is openness. All right. Not only is he going to be more open in terms of his government and let people see what his government is doing and let the Soviets see what the government is doing, but he's going to be open to the West. Okay, he's going to let the Soviet Union see the rest of the world. Now, as a result, the Soviet Union kind of wants what the rest of the world has, especially the democratic West led by the United States. Then he's going to call for perestroika. Perestroika is an economic restructuring of the Soviet society and the Soviet economy. It's going to allow for more free market things, okay? For example, people can own their own property and their own means of production. You don't have to share everything with everybody. The government's not going to be in control of everything. There's more freedom of choice there. And if we can do that between the openness in terms of the government and between allowing the people more economic freedom under perestroika, that's going to lead to a more democratic government in the Soviet Union period. And I would like to point out that Gorbachev is going to face opposition. In fact, he's away on vacation, and there's a supposed coup that's going to happen against him, which is when the country kind of turns against you and overthrows you. And a man by the name of Boris Yeltsin, who will become president after Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin puts down the coup and says, nope, we're not going to do this. Okay? And preserves Gorbachev's presidency because he sees the benefit of this openness and this perestroika, okay, and this restructuring of the economy and the government. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take a few years. In June 1987, Ronald Reagan puts even more pressure on Gorbachev in a speech given in West Germany at the Berlin Wall. Reagan's at the podium. He's speaking loud enough for the people on the east side of the wall to hear, on the communist side of the wall to hear. And he says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Okay? Putting more pressure. Remember, the Berlin Wall had kind of become a sign or a symbol of the separation east and west. So if that wall comes down, that's going to be a sign that the Cold War is at an end. Okay? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Again, it's going to take time, but in 1989, the wall comes down. And it is seen as the official beginning of the end of the Cold War. Like I said, it's a symbol. The wall was a symbol of the separation of the Cold War. When the wall comes down, it's a symbol that the Cold War is ending. So in 1989, when the wall comes down, that is the official beginning of the end of the Cold War. The following year, in 1990, there are free elections in East Berlin. Okay, East Berlin agrees to rejoin with West Berlin. All right. And then in 1991, those countries that Stalin had taken over who want independence, 14 of those former Soviet republics are going to declare their independence. Now, I'm not saying they're not all going to become democratic and capitalist. Some of them are going to stay communist, but they declare their independence from the Soviet Union. And when that happens, the Soviet Union collapses and the Cold War is now officially over and America has won. And America wins because of a combination of its military strength is number one. But then when the Soviets see what we have, namely democracy and capitalism and free market economy and things like that, they want what we have. So our military and our ideals are ultimately going to be what helps us achieve victory in the Cold War. Now, be sure you take the little quiz on this. Be sure you use your notes on this lesson and all the previous lessons on the Cold War to answer that Cold War assessment review sheet. And then be sure you take the final Cold War assessment. It is open notes, okay? And I highly recommend you do that review sheet so you have all the information in one easy to locate place. Best of luck to you all.